Historical leaders used 5 subtle psychological tricks to control the masses. These are covert tactics, designed to operate beneath the surface of consciousness, and they remain just as effective today. We begin with the most brutal crowd control trick, invented in Rome. Rome was a powder keg. Millions of people were crammed into squalid tenements. They were unemployed, they were hungry, and they were numerous. The Roman Republic was dead, replaced by the absolute power of the emperors. They faced one question: how to control a massive, volatile, and permanently disgruntled populace. The answer was astonishing in its simplicity. The poet Juvenal ironically named it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. This was not a welfare policy. This was a tool of mass psychological control. Panem, the bread, was the basic necessity. The emperors established the cura annone, a massive program of free or subsidized grain distribution. Hundreds of thousands of citizens lined up for their wheat. This was a strategic bribe. A full stomach is less likely to rebel. The emperor transformed citizens from active political participants into passive recipients of aid. Dependency was created, but bread only addressed the body. The mind was far more dangerous. A well-fed but bored crowd is still a threat. They have time to think. This is where circenses came in. The circus, the Colosseum, was a processing plant for negative emotions. Tens of thousands watched gladiatorial combats, wild beast hunts, and mock naval battles in the flooded arena. The Circus Maximus, the chariot racing stadium, was even larger, with an enormous capacity estimated between 150,000 and 250,000 people. These games were pure distraction. A man screaming for the green chariot team would forget his political injustices. Public anger was safely redirected. Instead of hating the system, they hated the red team. More importantly, it was a spectacle of power. The emperor sat in the imperial box. He alone decided the gladiator's fate with a turn of his thumb. Live or die. His power was tangible, displayed in blood and sand. The unspoken deal was clear. The populace gave up their political freedom, and in return, they were guaranteed never to be hungry and never to be bored. Rome's trick was appeasement. But what if your opponents aren't the mob, but scheming nobles and generals? How do you control them? The answer comes from Renaissance Italy, a world of warring city-states, a place where the Medici, Sforza, and Borgia families vied for power. In this context, Niccolò Machiavelli defined the second trick: divide et impera, divide and rule. The logic is simple. Two weak rivals, competing for your favor, are far easier to control than two rivals allied against you. A clever leader actively sows division. He makes himself the center of all information. A prince might grant a favor to General A, but publicly praise General B. He hints to General A that General B is complaining about him. He lies. The seeds of jealousy and suspicion are sown. Two potential allies become two competitors. Both will now stop sharing information with each other and instead report individually to the prince, trying to undermine the other. The prince's power is consolidated. He doesn't need to be the strongest. He just needs to be the one everyone else needs. Control by bread and control by division. But the third trick is even more sophisticated. It doesn't control actions. It controls loyalty itself. It is the cult of personality. Its master, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon understood that armies don't just fight for money. They fight for glory. And he would be the one to define glory. Napoleon wasn't just a general. He was an icon. He meticulously controlled his image. The painting, Napoleon Crossing the Alps, depicts him majestically on a rearing charger. In reality, he crossed the pass on a mule. But reality didn't matter. The image did. He personally wrote battlefield bulletins, exaggerating victories and hiding defeats. Most importantly, he created the Légion d'honneur, the Legion of Honor. This wasn't money, it was a ribbon, a symbol of honor that only Napoleon could bestow. Soldiers would die for it. By monopolizing glory, Napoleon turned personal loyalty into a cult. He wasn't just a leader, he was a legend. Napoleon sold people glory. The fourth trick sells people the truth. Or rather, a distorted version of it. The trick of the big lie. No one understood this better than Joseph Goebbels. The Nazi propaganda minister declared, "If you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth." This was not distraction, as in Rome. This was absolute information control. Goebbels seized the radio, the press, the cinema. Every source of information broadcast the same message. His system created a tangible enemy, the Jews, and repeated accusations against them daily, hourly. The goal was to destroy critical thinking. When there are no other sources for comparison, when the lie is repeated from every direction, the human brain is eventually forced to accept that information as reality. Truth was no longer something to be discovered. It became something to be decreed. But repeating a lie is not the final step. If you want absolute control, you must eliminate all other ideas. The final trick, the unification of thought. We come to Qin Shi Huang. After unifying China through war, he faced a problem. The country was united, but thought was not. Hundreds of schools of philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, Mohism, still existed. They offered different ways of seeing the world. Qin Shi Huang would not accept this. He enacted the burning of books and burying of scholars. This was not random barbarity. This was a deliberate political surgery. The goal was to leave only one ideology, legalism, which extolled the absolute power of the state. Qin Shi Huang standardized everything, from currency and measurements to axle widths. But his greatest ambition was to standardize thought. If there are no other books to read, no other scholars to listen to, then the emperor's thought is the only thought that exists. That is total control. 5 tricks. From bread and circuses to appease. Divide and rule to create discord. The cult of personality to forge loyalty. The big lie to shape reality. And the burning of books to annihilate rivals. The masters of power do not just rule. They create reality. The 5 most powerful control tricks in history. Bread and circuses. Divide and rule. The cult of personality. The big lie. And the unification of thought. They seem like omnipotent tools, capable of bending reality and turning millions into puppets. But there is an undeniable truth. Every empire built on these tricks has fallen. Every leader who used them has failed. Why? Because a reality engineered through oppression and deceit is always a fragile one. It's like a dam built with substandard materials. It may hold back the flow for a time, but the pressure of the water, in this case human nature, always builds. And eventually, it breaks. The collapse of these control systems is just as violent as their rise. Let's start with the one who tried to control thought most absolutely, Qin Shi Huang. He burned books, buried scholars, and believed he had created a 1,000-year empire. He was wrong. The moment he died in 210 BC, the illusion collapsed. Within just a few years, the Qin dynasty, the supposedly eternal dynasty, was annihilated. Why? Because the unification of thought has a fatal flaw. It cannot destroy memory. The burned books were still memorized by scholars, verbatim. The banned philosophies were still passed down in whispers. Qin Shi Huang's repression did not create unity. It created simmering hatred. As soon as the fear of him vanished with his death, that hatred exploded into widespread rebellion. The Han dynasty, which followed, restored the very Confucianism that Qin Shi Huang had tried to destroy. The trick of controlling by erasing knowledge had failed. It only proved that ideas are stronger than fire. Let's turn to Goebbels' trick. The big lie. It worked with terrifying efficiency for 12 years, but it too has an inherent weakness. It depends on an absolute monopoly on information. A lie can only become truth if no other truth is allowed to exist for comparison. When the war began, reality started to seep in. German soldiers on the Eastern Front saw the reality of the war, a reality that looked nothing like the propaganda films. Civilians in German cities, as Allied bombs fell on their heads, realized the promise of an inviolable 1,000-year Reich was a fraud. The collapse of this trick came in 1945. When Allied armies entered, they didn't just bring tanks, they brought cameras, They forced ordinary German citizens, who had lived in the propaganda bubble, to confront the reality of the concentration camps. Goebbels, in his final days, continued to repeat his lies over the radio from the bunker, while Russian artillery echoed outside. But no one was listening anymore. The big lie died when it collided with indisputable reality. And Napoleon, the master of the cult of personality. He built a legend around himself. But a cult of personality also has its price. It places the entire weight of the empire on one man's shoulders. While Napoleon was winning, at Austerlitz or Jena, the legend was invincible. But then, disaster struck. The 1812 invasion of Russia. His grand army was annihilated by the winter and attrition. Napoleon returned to Paris almost alone. For the first time, the legend was damaged. He was no longer invincible. When he was defeated at Leipzig, and later at Waterloo, the collapse wasn't just military. It was psychological. The Legion of Honor could not stop cannonballs. When he was exiled to St. Helena, he was no longer a legend. He was just a prisoner. The cult of personality only works when there is victory. When the victories end, the cult disintegrates. What about Machiavelli? Divide and rule seems like a more sustainable strategy. It relies on inherent human weaknesses like greed and jealousy. But it also has a cost. A leader who uses this trick creates a permanently toxic environment. His court is not a place of loyalty. It is a pit of vipers. Everyone schemes against each other, and eventually they will scheme against him. He lives in constant fear. The history of the Italian Renaissance is filled with assassinations and betrayals. The Borgia family, masters of this trick, collapsed the moment Pope Alexander VI died. His son, Cesare Borgia, the model for the prince, lost everything in a matter of weeks. Why? Because he had built his power on division, and when the center of power vanished, all the enemies he had created immediately allied to destroy him. Divide and rule creates a state that is weak from within. Finally, even Rome's bread and circuses could not last forever. This trick worked when the empire was at its peak, when there was wheat from Egypt and gold from Gaul to fund the games. But as the empire began to decline, this trick became an unbearable burden. In the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome faced invasions. The economy collapsed. Trade routes were cut. Suddenly, panem, the bread, was no longer abundant. The cura annii collapsed. Circenses, the circus, ran out of money. When the populace was both hungry and bored, the unspoken deal was broken. The anger that the Colosseum had safely diverted now turned against the state itself. When Alaric and the Goths sacked Rome in 410, they found a population that had been made soft, dependent, and incapable of self-defense. Bread and circuses did not protect Rome. It only made its fall more certain. The tricks of control, in the end, all carry the seeds of their own destruction. They don't fail because of a technical glitch. They fail because they go against a more fundamental force. The need for freedom, for truth, and for human dignity. They failed because they went against a more fundamental force, the need for freedom, for truth, and for human dignity. But the story doesn't end there. Empires fall, tyrants die. But the tricks themselves, they never die. They simply evolve. They learn from their failures. They shed their old violent and overt skin to don a new, subtle, invisible, and even more effective one. They adapt to the times because one thing never changes: power's desire to control and the vulnerability of the human psyche. Consider the failure of bread and circuses. It collapsed because it was too expensive. The Roman Empire ran out of wheat and gold to maintain the distraction. That was a costly lesson. The modern version fixed that flaw. It is no longer a state expense. It is a lucrative business. Today's circus isn't the Colosseum. It's in the palm of your hand. It's the endless news feed on social media. It's the streaming services designed for binge watching. It's the video games built to be addictive. Bread is no longer free wheat. It's the instant gratification of fast food, of online shopping, of a single click. This evolution is genius. First, it's financially self-sustaining. We don't just watch the circus, we pay for it. We pay with monthly subscriptions, and more importantly, we pay with our personal data. Second, it's no longer passive. In Rome, You watched. Today, you participate, you comment, you share, you yourself become a gladiator in the digital arena fighting for attention. This distraction is far more effective. It doesn't just make us forget our problems. It actively harvests our energy and attention, turning boredom into corporate profit. The state no longer needs to make us apathetic. We are voluntarily doing it with high efficiency. Likewise, Machiavelli's divide and rule learned from its failure. Its problem was that it was too personal. A prince had to spend great effort to whisper, lie, and balance factions. It was exhausting and risky. If he made a mistake, the factions would realize it and unite against him. The modern version has eliminated the middleman. No prince is needed. We have algorithms. The echo chambers and filter bubbles on social media are divide and rule, automated. An algorithm has no political intent. It has only one goal: maximize engagement. And it quickly learned that nothing generates engagement as powerfully as outrage, division, and fear. So, it automatically feeds us content that makes us angry at the other side. It hides moderate views and amplifies extreme voices. The result? Two people living in the same city, but existing in two completely different realities. They don't just disagree. They see each other as enemies. Machiavelli would be astonished. He had to work hard to divide a few dozen nobles. Algorithms are dividing billions of people automatically, 24/7. And the scariest part? No one is pulling the strings. There is no prince in the control room. Just an unthinking machine tearing apart the social fabric to sell ads. And Napoleon's cult of personality. It failed when battlefield reality, defeat in Russia, defeat at Waterloo, shattered the myth. The myth was too dependent on one man's performance. Modern leaders learned this. Instead of building a myth of invincibility, they build a myth of authenticity. They don't need grand oil paintings. They have social media. They can speak directly to the people. They post pictures of their breakfast. They share unfiltered thoughts. This is a much more subtle form of deification. It creates an illusion of intimacy, a personal relationship. Followers don't feel they are obeying a distant god. They feel they are supporting a friend, someone just like them, who is fighting for them. This myth is far more resilient. When this leader fails, it's not his fault. It's because the enemy is attacking our friend. Even Goebbels' trick, the big lie, has adapted. It failed when indisputable truth, the concentration camps, was exposed. It required an information monopoly that is impossible today. So the trick inverted its goal. If you can't make people believe one big lie, you make them believe nothing. This is the fire hose of falsehood tactic. Instead of one single source of propaganda, you create thousands, bots, fake accounts, counterfeit news sites, all pumping out contradictory versions of reality. The goal isn't to convince you. The goal is to exhaust you. When you are assaulted by so much chaotic information, you lose the ability to distinguish true from false. You stop seeking truth. You just cling to whatever fits your pre-existing beliefs. Goebbels wanted to replace the truth. The modern version just needs to make truth irrelevant. Finally, the brutal repression of Qin Shi Huang. Unification of thought failed because it was too overt. Burning books and burying scholars creates martyrs. It creates resistance. The 21st century version doesn't need fire. Instead of burning a book, you just tweak the search algorithm. You don't need to ban an idea. You just de-rank it, throttle its reach, or label it as misinformation. The major tech platforms have a power to control what we see that Qin Shi Huang could only dream of. He controlled what was written. They control what is found. This is soft thought control. People still feel free. They can access anything they think. But they don't realize their path is being invisibly shaped, that their choices have been pre-selected for them. This is the perfect form of control, a prison whose inmates do not realize they are in it. The old tricks have become stronger, because now they hide in the very systems we rely on every day. The old tricks have become stronger, because now they hide in the very systems we rely on every day. But this raises a crucial question. If these systems are running on autopilot, who is in control? Who are the masters of power of the 21st century? Historically, we could point to an individual, a Roman emperor, an Italian prince, a propaganda minister. Power was concentrated in one person's hands. Today, things are far more complex. Power has become diffused, invisible, and even more frightening. The new masters do not sit on thrones. They operate within structures we cannot see. The first and most obvious master of power is the tech master. Like Qin Shi Huang, the massive tech corporations build and standardize our environment. They design the public squares, social media, and the libraries, search engines. They don't need to openly burn books. They just need to change the algorithm. A small tweak in the source code can make an idea vanish from public consciousness more effectively than any censorship act of the past. At the same time, they use Machiavelli's trick on a massive scale. Their algorithm is an automated prince whose sole goal is to maximize engagement. It has learned that divide and rule is the most effective strategy. It actively sows division by amplifying outrage because outrage generates more clicks. They control us by designing our choices and divide us for profit. The second master of power operates on a deeper level. This is the financial master. If tech power controls the information we see, financial power controls the very reality we live in. This is an almost invisible power, operating not on screens, but in ledgers and closed boardrooms. Central banks and global financial institutions hold a form of control no emperor ever had, the power to create currency from thin air. Through the control of interest rates and the money supply, they can steer entire economies. They can create cycles of artificial prosperity and then devastating recessions. They can evaporate the value of the money in your pocket through inflation, an invisible tax, a silent confiscation of wealth that no one votes for. In the ancient world, power was land and armies. Today, power is debt. By controlling debt, national debt, personal debt, these institutions can dictate terms to governments, forcing them to change policies, privatize assets, or cut welfare. This is a subtle form of control. There are no gunshots, no propaganda, just numbers on a balance sheet quietly deciding the fate of billions. If the tech master controls the pipes of information, the third master of power is the information master, the one who controls the water that flows through them. Goebbels' trick, the big lie, failed because it relied on a monopoly. Today, that monopoly is gone. Instead, we have something more sophisticated, the power to set the narrative. The mainstream media and major news agencies may have lost their monopoly, but they still hold the power to shape perception. They decide what is news and what is ignored. They set the boundaries of public debate. By choosing to report on event A while ignoring event B, they create our reality. They can reduce a complex idea to a simple slogan or turn a real threat into a fringe topic. They don't need to lie outright. They just need to select the truth. By constantly repeating a certain narrative while ignoring others, they create an artificial consensus. They don't tell you what to think. They tell you what to think about. It's a form of soft thought control where repetition doesn't create truth but creates familiarity, and the human mind often confuses the two. The fourth master of power is the state security apparatus. This is the oldest control trick, based on fear. If Machiavelli advised it was better to be feared than loved, the modern security apparatus operates on a similar principle. But this fear isn't of a visible tyrant. It's the fear of a constant invisible threat. Terrorism, cybercrime, pandemics, chaos. To protect us from these threats, we are asked to surrender more and more of our privacy. This is a trade-off we continuously accept. We accept surveillance cameras on every corner. We accept our emails being scanned. We accept that our conversations are monitored, all in the name of safety. Control is no longer a soldier on watch. Control is a server somewhere silently collecting metadata. It is total surveillance, not for punishment, but for knowledge. We voluntarily trade our freedom for the promise of security. This is a dangerous bargain, because fear is an endless resource, and power given away in the name of safety is rarely ever returned. Power in the 21st century is not an iron fist smashing down. It is an invisible cage, built from convenience, fear, debt, and distraction. And we, the modern citizens, are too busy with our digital circus to notice we are living in it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy this type of content, please hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video.